And welcome to the Brett Snodgrass podcast. I have with me today Chris Galanos from Lubbock, Texas. What's going on, Chris?
Hey, Brett. It's good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while now. I know we've had a lot of conversations kind of leading up to this interview, and like I said, man, I really follow you. I think that you're an amazing man of God. I think that your heart is always in the right place, and I can't wait for our listeners just to kind of hear your story over the last decade plus what's kind of going on now. So I know you just came out with the new book, From Megachurch to Multiplication, and we're going to dive into that. So how was writing that book, by the way? Everyone wants to write a book, but
Yeah.
actually doing it, what's it like?
I would say it's a laborious process for sure. Brett, the way it was a little easier for me is I started blogging. And then I was able to take the blog and kind of turn that into a book. So it's kind of like I was writing a chapter at a time, posting it as a blog, and then kind of compiled it together with some extra chapters. So that kind of forced me to write a little bit over time rather than thinking, I'm going to write a book and then give up after a week.
I know.
Blogging each week helped
Yeah.
me to feel like, hey, I think I've got enough entries that this might be a book. So
That's awesome. That's a great way. I've done some blogs. Obviously, I think that's how we met because I had written some blogs on biggerpockets.com and you were interested in real estate. And that's how you found me. You reached out, and
that's
we've been
right. Yeah.
friends ever since. So, again, thanks, Chris, for being on the show, guys. If you're tuning in, please check out our YouTube channel, the Brett Snodgrass channel, and make sure you also subscribe. That's how we get known on our channel. So, appreciate you if you're listening to this on audio. So, Chris, number one, I just want to kind of introduce you. Go over your highlight reel. So, just pretend like you're putting in your highlight reel, you're getting recruited from a college team or something. I don't know. That's how I always represent it. So Chris is the founding pastor of Experience Life Church out of Lubbock, Texas. He grew to a mega church. Actually, he had 13,000 people over the last decade commit their lives to Christ. He had 7,000 people baptized. That Experience Life has been able to baptize 7,000 people. And in the last few years, Chris has been reflecting on what this looks like going from a megachurch to multiplication, kind of going back to the early church, which obviously, that's where we all want to be, and really kind of studying and seeing where the American church has went, where other countries has went. So we're going to dive into what he's been doing now, going from megachurch to multiplication. He has a wife, Emily, and he also has two beautiful children, and they live in Texas. And he also started a business. Like I said, that's how we met, because he didn't want to get paid and taking payroll from the church as much, so he wanted to start a business, a real estate business, and he's been doing that the last 4 or 5 years. So that's your highlight reel, Chris. I do pretty good.
You did great, Brett. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So I just want to kind of start out, number one, I always like just to kind of hear people's stories, and I want to hear your story, kind of taking yourself back to how you came to Christ. So share that with us.
I'd love to. So when I was probably about 8 years old, my parents signed me up to go to a children's camp, one that you'd have to travel to, Brett, with the church. And my dad's always been a little bit nervous about me riding in the car with somebody else. He was really nervous shipping me off to this children's camp, a couple hours away. And it turns out he had a reason to be nervous. So we ended up on a bus heading to children's camp. We had arrived. Everything was good. We were heading, this is near Ruidoso, New Mexico. So think like mountains, unlike West Texas, we're in the mountains. And one of the camp counselors was going to drive us one day to a nearby swimming pool, Brett, at this children's camp. And so we get in the car, and little did we know he wasn't supposed to be driving. He had a condition called narcolepsy. Have you heard of narcolepsy, Brett?
I have. That's where you just fall asleep.
Yeah, exactly. Those people shouldn't drive,
Yeah.
Especially if it's not managed well. So
I think I learned that from a Saturday Night Live skit, actually. Like,
well, we didn't know this, obviously. And so he's driving, Brett, picture this, a van full of kids in the mountains
wow.
to a nearby swimming pool. Well, I think it's about 2 hours away, which is not good if you have narcolepsy. I mean, that's a while to be driving. And I think we were in the car for, I don't know, an hour or so. And he drove us off the side of a cliff.
Oh my gosh.
And we were in the van, and the van literally tumbled down this. I mean, it wasn't, like a 90-degree angle. It was kind of like this, and it tumbled down this hill, basically, this side of a mountain, and then landed upside down on top of a little storage shed. And there was like a nearby RV park. So good news is we survived. The fact that anybody survived, the next day in the paper, the headline was, it's a miracle that these children survived this massive wreck. But people started coming out from their RVs, and ambulances came, and they took us all to the hospital. And Brett, happy to report the worst injury was a concussion. Most of us had cuts and bruises and things like that. I remember I was eating peanut butter M&Ms in the back of the van. And I just remember, I didn't know what was happening, obviously, but it felt like marbles were hitting me in the head. And I didn't know why. And it's obviously all of us, we didn't have seatbelts on, Brett. That's another thing. There were no seatbelts in the van. It was all the heads of the kids hitting each other. Brett, we end up at the bottom on top of this storage shed. The window is totally broken out on the side. And so I asked my friend if he's okay. And we all just start crawling out these windows. And then the rescue workers come, and everybody's okay. I tell you that story to say, you can imagine an 8-year-old kid going through something like that and going, what would happen to me if I were to have died? Do I know for sure where I'm going to spend eternity? And so I would say, Brett, it was around that time that I started asking those questions. And I had a great Sunday school teacher at our church that regularly, every week, as a part of the Sunday school lesson, would share the gospel with us. And he had us memorizing verses. And so even as kind of a pre-Christian, I was memorizing these verses and trying to win the memory competitions and all of that. And those verses just, lit a fire in my heart and resulted in me turning from my sin and putting my faith in Jesus. And I remember one Sunday, the Sunday school teacher saying, if anybody wants to commit their life to Christ, I'd love to help them. And I said, that's me. I can tell God is drawing me to himself. And I want to know for sure where I'm going to spend eternity. I want to go to heaven and be with Jesus. I believe I'm falling in love with him and want to turn from my sin and put my trust in Jesus. So I remember, Brett, he took me outside the church, and there on the sidewalk in the front of the church, and I prayed to receive Christ that day when I was about 9 years old. The wreck was around 8 years old. I was about 9 years old. Prayed to receive Christ, started walking with Christ, and kind of lost the fire after a while. And then around the age of 16, my dad started doing a study called Experiencing God. Have you heard of that, Brett, by Henry Blackaby, Experiencing God?
I have not, no.
Okay. So it's just a popular Bible study, and he went through it, and it changed his life, and he offered to take me through it. Brett, at this point in my life, I was consumed with computers. As a 16-year-old, I was a Microsoft certified systems engineer. I was working for Microsoft and other internet service providers, kind of the computer nerd of the school, being called out of my high school to go help the internet service provider in town because their servers were down. I was that guy. Okay. And my dad took me through this study, and God, through his word in this study, just set me on fire for him again. Felt called to ministry soon thereafter. And once graduated college, went to seminary, and then we started a church.
Wow. So experiencing God. Talk about that a little bit. What was it? Because obviously you were a Christian following Christ, and you obviously, I think, went to church, right?
Yep.
And probably were, I don't know, in some youth group maybe. And but this really got to you. What do you think it was about this study that really hit home with you? It sounds like it was you started to build this intimate relationship with God. What was it about that? Do you remember anything really stood out to you?
Yeah, Brett.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm glad you asked that question. It's actually where we got the name for our church. So is that first word, experiencing God. My dad had become a Christian, Brett, in college, and started following Jesus, was on fire. But for him, it was a lot about head knowledge, learning a lot about the Bible, learning a lot about theology. But experiencing God, I don't know that he would say he really had much of a personal relationship with God. More, he definitely had put his faith in Christ, but it was just more in his head, if you know what I'm saying. Well, he went through experiencing God, Brett, after years of studying theology, and he would be reading magazines while the pastor was preaching, just like, I already know all this, just not a vibrant relationship with God. And he went through this study, Brett, and it was just on asking the question, do you just know about God, or are you experiencing him daily? Through prayer and reading his word and so on. And it just really touched my dad. And Brett, here's where we saw the change in him. So, at that time, I'm just consumed with the computer. I'm on the computer all the time. I'm obsessed with computers. And something happened to my dad. He went from just kind of lukewarm, sitting in church. I'm not sure if he's really wanting to be there too. Brett, I would wake up early to go to school, to high school. And my bedroom was upstairs, and I'd come downstairs, and it'd be 7 o'clock in the morning. And I would see my dad lying prostrate on the ground in the living room. I remember the first time this happened, I said, Dad, are you okay? And he got up and he said, yes, and I'm fine. I said, Dad, what are you doing? He said, I'm praying. Mm. And I said, you're praying? I said, how long have you been here? He said, about 3 hours. I said, you've been praying for 3 hours laying on the ground? What? So Brett, that was kind of the beginning of just this transformation that happened in his life, where he really began to experience a relationship with God, not just know a lot about him, Brett, like just a lot of churchgoers, know a lot about God. I'm learning about God every weekend, new sermon I'm learning, but experiencing God, Brett, through loving and obeying him and following him is just so much more exciting. Anyways, Brett, you can imagine if you see that in your dad, I mean, and he, and he's praying for us, and he came up to my room, Brett, one more quick story. He came up to my room one time. I'm on the computer. Again, I'm obsessed with the computer. And he had been, writing in a journal. And he came up to my room one day, it was after school, and he said, son, can I tell you how I've been praying for you? And Brett, that was just not normal, know? And I was like, and I didn't want to say no. So I was like, okay. And so I turn around in my chair, and he kneels next to my bed. And he starts reading his journal and starts weeping. My dad was a Marine, Brett. I mean, and he's weeping as he's reading this. And he just said, son, I want you to know, I'm praying that you would be as passionate about Jesus as you are that computer.
Wow.
And man, that cut me to the heart.
Wow.
Because I knew it was my God. The computer and programming and all that was my God. Brett, I don't know if you remember Napster. I knew Napster. I was friends with Napster. Okay. So I was on the computer. I mean, that was my God. And he just said, son, I've been praying you'd love Jesus, more than you love that computer.
Wow.
And as a result of that, he said, son, do you want to go through experiencing God? It really made a difference in my life, opened up God's word to me, gave me fresh eyes to see it. And I said, sure. He took me through it, Brett. And the result was, again, like my dad, me realizing, hey, it's not just about knowing about God. It's about experiencing every day a relationship with him where he speaks to you and you follow and obey him and fulfill it. You get to go to work with your heavenly Father and make disciples of all nations. And Brett, it just set me on fire all over again.
Wow. Wow, that is amazing. I always picture, just as a father, I'm a father of 4 kids, and I always ask myself, would by chance, my kids walking in on me like you did with your dad, praying or doing something else? And right. I think that's so important. What do you think would have happened if your father wouldn't have gone down that journey, had just been doing the same thing, had the head knowledge, didn't need anything else? Do you think it, I don't know. Do you ever think about that? Like, if your father obviously really, really influenced you to go deeper. Yeah. And I'm just speaking to all the fathers out there too, because I think that fathers are so influential in their kids' life, whether they think so or not.
Brett, it's a big deal. And I would say the same thing to fathers. Your kids are watching you. They're just watching. And so, Brett, me and my sister would both say our hearts were revived watching my dad become a man of prayer and a man who loved and experienced God. So had he not had that experience, I don't know if we would have started a church. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I wouldn't just be, in some computer job, running a computer company, just chasing money, or something like that as a Christian, but maybe a lukewarm one.
Yeah.
I
just like to hit home on that, because a lot of our listeners are fathers or mothers, and sometimes we think that, especially if our kids reach a certain age, that we lose a lot of our influence. And you were a teenager, right? And and it wasn't anything that your dad. A lot of times we get in the lecture mode, like we want to teach and we want to give a lesson, and if they make a mistake, you just are chopping at the bit to give them a lesson of life, right? And
right.
And your dad was just living it, right? He wasn't
modeling it, Brett. It was a modeling thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want to fast forward. So you went to seminary school at Southwest Seminary in Texas. You got
Southwestern, in Fort Worth.
Southwestern in Fort Worth, Texas, and then you became a pastor. So you went down that road. And what was your dream? So you graduated seminary school. What was your big goal?
Well, I assumed, Brett, because before I went to seminary, I was really involved in our church and college ministry. And so I assumed I'd go to seminary, get a master's of divinity, and just go back and do college ministry? I wasn't even really sure. And then once I get a couple of years into seminary, I'm like, well, a lot of people that are getting this degree are becoming senior pastors. So maybe I'm supposed to be a senior pastor. Brett, I just was in love with Jesus and I wanted the whole world to know. Okay, so here I am at seminary studying Greek going, I don't know, how all this is going to apply. I just know I'm fired up, And so, Brett, the way it worked is our last semester of seminary, and again, you can get it from the computer nerd side, I was on the fast track to get out of seminary. It's not that I didn't like it, Brett. I just liked ministry. So, it's a 3 or 4 year degree and I was done in like 2. Okay. I mean, I was moving quick. I say that to tell you, my last semester, I needed to get an elective in, and it really could be anything. And so I was just looking for something to take, something that was available. And Brett, there was an elective at seminary for my last semester called church planting. Brett, I thought it was about botany. I mean, I thought, okay, I'm going to take this easy elective. I'm going to learn how to plant roses out in front of the churches, roses and these tulips and these little flowers, make the church building all pretty. It's going to be so easy. I don't know anything about planting, but I can learn about planting. I had no idea. Brett, I take the class on church planting. It's about planting churches, new churches, not botany. And Brett, I'm from a kind of not a super small town, but a smaller town, not a metro area. And just the idea of church planting, people will be like, what? We've already got a lot of churches around here, And so I just never really thought about church planting. But Brett, I started to hear stories of guys that were going out and they were meeting in basketball gyms, or they were meeting in school auditoriums, and they were reaching people that wouldn't normally go to church, and, creating worship environments where, people that weren't used to going to church would enjoy coming to, because it was catered toward them feeling welcome and all that. And I'd never even heard about anything like that before. And I remember it was at a conference that we had to go to as a result of this class, Brett, where I was listening to them talk about church plants and baptizing all these people. And again, Brett, I'm from more traditional background where you don't baptize a lot of people, and these are new churches and they're baptizing people and, horse troughs. And I'm just going, this is amazing. And I just remember hearing God. It's almost like he whispered to me at that conference, I want you to plant a church like that. That's what I sensed him saying. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know if my wife's going to go for this, because when you plant a church, you don't have any money when you start. You got to raise money like a missionary. There's nobody to pay you. I mean, and so I go home and I tell her, I'm like, babe, here's this thing. Here, I went to this conference. I heard these things, and I just think this may be what the Lord wants us to do. And she said, I've sensed him saying the same thing to me. I'm like, we're going to plant a church. I mean, this is going to happen. And Brett, and so that's kind of how we got into church planning, just taking this elective at seminary, trying to get out quickly. And then we end up going back to our hometown to start a church.
Wow. So you go back to Lubbock, Texas, and that's where Experience Life Church was planted. And then the story went, I've heard you say it was kind of in your living room. You had a few people, and you started to grow this church. So talk about, just that decade, right? Just to kind of give us a brief summary. You planted a church and you started to grow really, really fast. I mean, how were you feeling? What was going on? It's just almost like a blur whirlwind. Like you don't even know what happened. Like talk to us about that decade of planting this big church. I mean, you had 13,000 people give their life to Christ, 7,000 baptisms. Yeah. What is that like?
Brett, it was a wild ride, but it was amazing. I mean, I loved it. So we started out, remember I was telling you about those guys starting in gyms or starting in schools in our town, Brett, in Lubbock, almost to protect the church. There were some basketball leagues that were playing in the schools on Sunday mornings. And the school board evidently thought they should be going to church. So they shut down the schools to all outside activities. Well, then, Brett, that meant we couldn't get a place to meet, even though we were the church, because they had shut down the schools. And a lot of my peers that were planning churches, Brett, and other places were meeting in like school auditoriums. So we didn't know where we were going to meet. Well, then the Lord led us to a skating rink. And you can imagine a skating rink's a big open space. Yeah. And so, Brett, we went up to the guy that owned the skating rink and we just said, hey, I don't know how big skating is these days. I don't know how many people are coming here, but could we like rent the whole thing out on Sunday morning and like have a church service in here? Turns out he said yes. Brett, we grew to several thousand in a skating rink.
Wow.
But we started outside the rink. We were so small. Our first gathering, there were 60 people. We met like in the carpeted area, like when you walk into the rink, like before you ever get to the skating rink, we're meeting there. And Brett, at the first gathering, I was playing guitar and singing and then putting it down and then preaching. And then because I had led worship before. And so it was just totally grassroots. There's just a few of us. And then, we had another gathering and it was about double the size of that, and another one, and it was bigger. And then because we had it once a month for 3 months leading up to our grand opening. And Brett, in the church planning world, having a couple hundred or more at a grand opening is a pretty big start to a church plant. And at our grand opening, we had just over 300 people come to our first big gathering. And then they tell you in church planning, expect about half to come back, because your grandma's coming that day, but she's going to go back to her church, and your friends coming to support you, but they're not going to be there. So Brett, we had 330 the first week. The next week we had 300. So we were like, okay, I think more came back than we're supposed to. And then Brett, so that's September. By our first Easter, we had 800. And by our first year anniversary, we had over 1,500 people.
Wow.
And then and it was just, oh my gosh, Brett. We were having multiple services and people were lined up around the building to get into the church, And we had metal chairs. It was the most uncomfortable church you've ever been in. Think stinky feet from the skates, stinky feet smell. And you come in and the chairs are terrible and you're falling out of the chair, it's breaking because it's an old metal chair we borrowed from a church. It was, Brett, but that's awesome, right? It's like starting a business.
At least you probably had a disco ball somewhere in that skating rink.
Brett, our first couple gatherings, if you came early, we would have free skates. and then you'd sit down and go to church.
That's so cool.
Anyway, so it continued to grow. Outreach Magazine named us one of the fastest growing churches in the nation. We were in the top 100 fastest growing churches in the nation, 5 of our first 7 years in. We're 5 of the years we were in there. And then I was named the youngest megachurch pastor in the nation because I became a megachurch pastor, which is 2,000 plus in attendance at about age 28. And so from about 28 to 30 or 31, they would just contact me each year and say, did you know you're the youngest? I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing. Is it good to be the youngest? I'm not sure if it is.
Right.
But anyways, and so it just continued to grow and saw lots of people, as you said, come to Christ and be baptized. And it was exciting. But there was one weekend where I think we baptized, or over 2 weekends, we baptized 600 people in the swimming pool outside the skating rink. So there would be 5 of us baptizing and we would dunk 5 people all at the same time because the line was so long, you couldn't even do it one at a time.
Wow. That's so cool. That just reminds me of my early 20s. There was a church planted in a movie theater. And I remember they would pass around the popcorn buckets. That's how they did the offering and things like that. Anyways, that's just so funny. So did you stay in the skating rink or did you, how long were you in the skating rink?
So we were in the skating rink our first 6 years. And then we bought an old abandoned bus station. Brett, you'll appreciate this from a real estate perspective. Okay. So there was a bus, an old TNM&O bus station, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma bus station, kind of popular around there. And it's the same bus station where my grandparents had come into Lubbock from New York back in the 50s. That's how they got here, is on a bus in this bus station. Brett, we bought the bus station, we renovated it, and we made it our first satellite campus. It wasn't as big as the skating rink. So the skating rink was still the main campus. That was our satellite. And then, Brett, eventually we built another main campus near where the skating rink was that became our biggest campus. And then in that 10-year period, we had actually 10 different locations. We didn't own all the buildings. Some of them we rented. But we had 10. We owned 2 buildings and we had 10 8 physical locations, 2 digital locations where we met.
Wow. Well, that's awesome, man. So you were living pretty much every pastor's dream. You graduated seminary school, and that's the dream. You had thousands of people. You were the youngest pastor that has a mega church, which is pretty cool, right? You're getting some cool things going on, recognition, God's moving, and you're growing really, really rapidly. So take us to just kind of a few years ago, it sounds like God, he was kind of working in you. You had a goal, I think, to have 10,000 people come to Christ in your first 10 years, right? And you guys met that goal, I think in year 8. Is that correct?
Right. That's right.
And so God starts working on you, and you're getting ready to set we call this the Bhag, the big hairy goal, right? In business world, you set this. Now you're getting ready to set this new goal because you've already reached this Bhag goal of 10,000 people coming to Christ. And what's going on? What's going on? You have you could just keep growing, and you could keep putting out different things, more people coming to Christ, more decisions for Christ, and you needed something different. Talk to us about that.
And you wouldn't believe, Brett, how popular that question is that you just asked me. I mean, that you articulated very well a question a lot of people ask. So let me give you the short story, and then Brett, you can stop me if this gets too long. But so we prayed in our living room when there was 12 of us before we were in the skating rink. We prayed, God, in the next 10 years, would you allow us to see 10,000 people come to know Jesus? We knew, Brett, it was kind of an absurd prayer, especially in a small town. There's not a lot of big churches in that town, but we just, because we started the church to reach lost people, not to just have saved people from other churches come and leave their church and come to our church. We just wanted, unchurched people to come to know Jesus. And so we were praying, Lord, would you give us 10,000 in 10 years, praying with as much faith as we could muster. But Brett, honestly, it wasn't a lot of faith. And I don't know that any of us believed it would happen. Well, fast forward from that prayer meeting in year 8, we had the 10,000th person check on a connection card. They were committing their life to Christ. Now, why I think this is significant is in a lot of churches, they just have you raise your hand. So there's duplicates, and you don't know who they are. And Brett, we only counted one if we had name, phone number, address, so we could follow up with them. So 10,000 unique commitments to Christ that checked on a card and gave us information, right? Not just like 10,000, oh, me, and they raise their hand every weekend. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, you're the computer nerd, tracking data. I get it.
We're tracking. I mean, we are tracking. These are KPIs.
Yeah, that's right.
In the church world. And so, in year 8, we crossed 10,000. And so 2 years ahead of schedule, right? Lord, we didn't even know this was possible. Lord, this has been amazing. And so then, Brett, we started praying a very dangerous prayer. I talk to pastors about this all the time. I tell them, don't pray this prayer. Whatever you do, don't pray this prayer unless you're willing to give up all you have to follow Jesus. But Brett, the prayer was this: Lord, you did more than we could have asked or imagined in our first 10 years. Lord, what do you want our vision to be for the next 10 years? Not, Brett, Lord, here's our vision for the next 10. God, would you bless that?
Yeah.
Would you bless that? No, Lord, what do you want our vision to be? Lord, this is your church. You're the senior pastor. We're just under shepherds. So what's your vision for us? Lord, we're willing to do whatever you want us to do. This has been the journey of a lifetime. Well, Brett, around that time, I got an annual report from a missions partner in India that we supported, right? So when a church gives to various mission partners, Brett, your church or others, they'll usually give you an annual report to let you know kind of how your money's being used and the fruit that they're bearing. And this was from a friend of mine. His name was Victor. And I knew him from the past church that I was in. And that's why we had adopted them as a missions partner in our church. And I got the annual report. And I'm sure I'd gotten it before, Brett, and just didn't have time to read it or something. But this is around that 10,000 mark in 8 years. Lord, what do you want our vision to be? And I opened up the annual report. And Brett, after looking at it, I almost pass out. Like I almost fall out of my chair. Because here's what it said. This guy, Victor, had pastored a traditional church in India. It's a very big church for India, about 500 people. And he felt the Lord leading him to leave his traditional church and focus, Brett, solely on the Great Commission, making disciples that multiply. In his first year of doing this, after having left his church, salary, all of that, they saw really not much. In his second year, they didn't see much, but they're planting lots of seed, Brett, praying for a harvest, just not seeing much. Third year, not much. Fourth year, not much. Fifth year, Brett, they see their first church planted as they were focusing on just making disciples that multiply in very simple ways that could be reproduced. In their fifth year, Brett, they see their first church planted. 20 years later, they've baptized over 10 million people.
Wow.
And they have hundreds of thousands of churches where these 10 million meet. Now, in that annual report, it gave a low, mid, and high estimate of their impact. A missions organization that was connected to them, Brett, sent in research teams because they weren't sure they believed them probably. So they sent in research teams to try to measure the impact. Well, you can't exactly count 1 million people,
Right.
So you're trying to get like a range. So Brett, the annual report said low estimate, 8 million baptized believers. Mid estimate, 10 million baptized believers, the number I used. High estimate, possibly 12 million, Brett, baptized believers. And I took that report just shaken by that, like, Lord, this is amazing. And I gave it to our leadership team, Brett, as we were praying, Lord, what do you want our vision to be for our next 10? And I gave it to the leadership team. And I just asked them this, Brett. Imagine being there. I asked them, guys, look at this. Do you think God could do in America what he's doing in India? And you can you can imagine the response. The Sunday school answer is, "Oh yeah, of course." But
God
the real answer is, Chris. Here's the thing. You're kind of crazy. Okay. Here's the thing. He's doing that in India, but I'm not sure about America. And America has these issues, and India is different. And just all these reasons why God could do it, but I don't know if He would. Just kind of all of that. And so, but we kind of discuss all that. We're just like, but what if? Do we really believe by faith that with God all things are possible? Yeah, we believe. And so, Brett, through this season of praying and fasting and reading some other material and hearing about really what God was doing around the world, not just Brett in India. We heard stories like that in Africa. We had heard in countries in Africa. We heard stories like that in China and from the Middle East. And we just saw around the world, disciples are multiplying. Churches are multiplying. In America, it feels a little bit more like addition, but around the world, you're seeing multiplication. Yeah. And so, Brett, it was just impossible for us any longer to not say, Lord, would you do in our country what we hear you're doing overseas in India and China and Africa? Would you do here, Lord? How can we know this now and not pray this would happen here? Long story short, Brett, we start sensing God wants us to pray for 1 million. Now, to an American pastor, that sounds ridiculous. But to an African pastor or an Indian pastor, they're seeing that. So the only reason it would seem ridiculous to us is because we're not aware of what God is doing around the world, and we're not humbling ourselves as American pastors and learning from them. Because if we were, we would know God is doing miraculous things, and we should ask God to do them here. And so, Brett, I got up at our 10-year anniversary, had all of our different 10 campuses together in one place. We met in Texas Tech's old basketball coliseum. It's where we had to meet to get all of us in there. And we met, and I just got up and said, we're cheering. God, thank you for what you did in the first 10. And then I said to the church, Brett, I said, we believe the Lord has spoken to us, to our elders and to our leadership through men like Victor. And he was sitting, Brett, on the second row that day. He'd seen millions baptized. And we said to our church, we sense God is leading us in the next 10 to make disciples that would reach 1 million people, not just 10,000. Well, you can imagine the Coliseum. They're going, oh yeah, for a minute, until they're like, now, wait a second. Yeah. Do we have enough room in these buildings for 1 million people? Like, how are we going to, we start thinking in the American box, right? Like, how is this even, you can't reach 1 million people.
Yeah, you got to have like 100 campuses and buildings and money.
Yeah. And we calculate the cost, Brett, that it would maybe take to do what we had been doing for 1 million people. It was like $5 billion. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, if God had given us a vision to reach 1 million, we couldn't keep doing things the way we had been doing them. Mm-hmm. And Brett, it's not that what we were doing was bad. I mean, you just heard it was fantastic. God was moving, but we couldn't do what we had been doing if we felt God wanting us to reach 1 million. Yeah. That's why, Brett, in India and China and Africa and places like that, there's not tons of church buildings because those are hard to multiply, right? They meet in smaller gatherings in a house or under a tree or in a business or a park or something like that, and they can multiply more quickly. And so we said, we feel like God's leading us to go for the 1 million. And Brett, then we told him, and that means things are going to change.
And Americans don't like change.
No,
they want to be comfortable.
Brett, not only do Americans not like change, church people don't like change. And so, Brett, the good news is there was a lot of people, they had been waiting all their life for something like this, and they joined us. And then, Brett, there were many others that just said, we're cheering for you guys, but we're really looking for that traditional church experience. And so I think we're going to move on to another church. And Brett, we prayed for them and blessed them as they went and just said, let the Lord speak to you about who wants to be involved in this next journey with us. But we just feel like we've heard from him. And Brett, we told him we'd be obedient to him, whatever he said, which is why I've told pastors, don't pray that unless you're willing to risk it all. And so, Brett, we kind of put it all on the altar and said, Lord, our church is yours. You lead us. And we've been following him ever since.
Wow. Well, I wanted to just dive into this. I know you wrote the book now, that's called From Megachurch to Multiplication, which is really talking about this. And where's the best place for someone to get that book? I mean, I've seen it on Amazon, which you have some amazing reviews. I've been reading those. So,
you guys can get it on Amazon. It's paperback, Kindle, or if you would like me to read it to you, it's called Audible. We've got that.
That's what I did, and Brett, I heard your voice.
That took forever. That took forever. And so I'll do that. And then, Brett, if they want to order in bulk, a lot of churches and groups will order 100 or something. You can get them cheaper on our website if you'll buy in bulk. I think you have to buy at least 25, but it's experiencelifenow.com. and they can click on books at the top and they can order from us directly in bulk, and it'll save them some money.
Yeah, definitely. So you guys can go to experiencelifenow.com, or I got it on audible.com.
Yeah.
I like listening to Chris read it, so it's really cool. But I want to just dive into that. So let's just look at the American church, what the American church is doing, because there's been a lot of church movements. The American church has changed, right? I mean, I grew up in a small church, Methodist church, and we had, I don't know, 100 people at that time sang hymns, right? And then when I went to college, they started singing, right? They had the rock bands, right? And then you're starting to listen to, Awesome God and, Michael W. Smith and these concerts. So that started to become a movement, and I was like, man, this is really, really cool. But a lot of people didn't like that movement, right? And then now it's in every church, right? And I've seen a lot of the smaller churches start to die out, just like business. A lot of the big churches come in, start planting churches, and the smaller church start dying out because they can't afford it. They don't have some of the ministries that the bigger churches can afford, like the kids ministries, things like that. So now we're kind of this movement where it's a lot of big churches, right? And the smaller churches are starting to die out as far as the American church and the buildings. And I just want to dive into just what do you think is happening now? I mean, this is kind of a new thing. I mean, you started talking about this. I've heard a couple other people talk about it, but is this, do you think that this is just where this movement is going to be? It's like going away from the mega churches too? And talk to us about what you're actually doing, right? Because what is the American church doing versus, how are they growing so much? 10 million people. I mean, what's going on? How do they do the multiplication?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, Brett, too, this conversation would have been a lot different pre-COVID than post-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking to a lot of pastors that, Brett, even if they're wanting to continue down the traditional path, they recognize there will be a new normal in the American church.
Mm-hmm.
What that looks like, nobody knows for sure. But I've heard lots of people say they just don't think it's going to return to exactly the way it was before. Brett, I actually think that will be healthy for the American church because I think it will purify the American church. But do I think that there will still be large traditional churches and small traditional churches and all that? I absolutely think so. And I would say when we use the word movement, Brett, we use it a little bit differently than some might use it. So like you described, going from one type of music to another or something, more like a movement based on preferences. Your preferences change, what you like. The way we're actually defining, and if people read the book, they'll see this movement has to do with measuring multiplication. So hymns to Michael W. Smith really is no indication of if you're more effective at accomplishing your mission. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Or a more traditional looking building to a more contemporary looking building or whatever. Those kind of quote movements would be a little different than what we're talking about, which are miraculous multiplication movements, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
One of the people, Brett, that's out there right now that's popularizing just maybe a critique of the American church and its difficulty in multiplying is a guy by the name of Francis Chan.
Mm-hmm.
Some of your listeners may know who that is. And he, similar to us, Brett, went overseas, saw some things in the underground church, I believe in China and in India, that when he came back to his megachurch, he just thought, I'm not sure if I can do this anymore now that I've seen what I've seen and seen what God is doing. So he tells his story in a book called Letters to the Church, which I would also recommend to your audience. But he just talked, and then he started a decentralized house church network, I believe in California, and he's since moved to Hong Kong. But anyways, I do think, Brett, to your point, there is a number of pastors that are saying, hey, we're not against what we've done. In fact, like I'm saying, Brett, I loved our first 10 years. I'm for it. Thank you, Jesus. It's awesome. Brett, we're just acknowledging its addition. So we were a very large church, but Brett, we were, not hardly reaching our city, much less our region or our state or our nation that so desperately needs Jesus, because we're growing one by one as people bring their friends to church. Brett, again, I'm not disparaging that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That is not the same thing, though, as multiplying disciples. It's not the same thing. If you look in Acts 19, it talks about how in a 2-year period, everybody in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. And they, scholars estimate that was about 15 million people. That doesn't happen by addition.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in Africa and in India and in China, it only happens by multiplication. What do we mean by multiplication? A church starts a church that starts a church that starts a church. And then another stream of churches start churches, start churches, start disciples make disciples, kind of like Acts 4, where John and Peter are ordinary, unschooled men, but they knew they had been with Jesus, Brett, and they couldn't stop them because they said, we won't stop speaking about what we've seen and heard. That results in multiplication. I don't hear many people in the American church saying things like that, but we should be saying things like that. As we read the book of Acts, we should go, we want to see this. And in Acts chapter 6, Brett, it talks about how the number of disciples was increasing rapidly. Why? Because there was some famous preacher in a building that everybody came and listened to? No, because people were going and telling their friends, and their friends were, people in the church were empowered. Ephesians 4, the pastors and apostles and the evangelists and the teachers, the prophets, they use their gifts to equip the people for ministry, right? That's what it says in Ephesians 4. I don't know that happens a lot in our context as much. That's what's supposed to be happening. It's not that you don't pay the pastor, you don't tithe, and so the pastors do the work of the ministry. Everybody's supposed to do the work of the ministry. Everybody owns the Great Commission. We're all out there making disciples that multiply. And Brett, I think when that happens, we'll see far more people come to know Jesus than just the addition, even that big churches are seeing, which, Brett, again, I'm saying is not bad. What they're seeing overseas, Brett, is Acts 4, ordinary men and women that are saved by Jesus, that go to all of their oikos, which is a Greek word meaning like your network, all of their family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, and they cannot stop speaking about what they've seen and heard.
Yeah.
Brett, that starts to multiply the gospel in such a way that a multiplication movement starts, and a whole area is saturated with the gospel in a short period of time, right? So there's a guy I know in Africa, also a traditional pastor, so had a nice traditional church, but ever since he started multiplying disciples like the Great Commission in the last 10 years, they've seen 1 million people come to Christ. So Brett, but an American pastor has trouble understanding that, because it's not that the American pastor or the African pastor preaches to 1 million people, right? And they come to Christ. It's not like that.
Exactly.
That's addition. That's addition.
Yeah.
It's not bad, but it's not multiplication. Right. Multiplication is you make a disciple and they make a disciple and they make a disciple. That's multiplication. That's what the Great Commission is talking about. And Brett, I just think that's more uncommon in the North American context, but it's not uncommon around the world. And my challenge to pastors, Brett, constantly, I talk to pastors all the time. My challenge to them is humble yourself and learn from what God is doing around the world. Humble yourself and learn from our missionary friends and our African and Chinese and Indian friends and what God's doing there. Let's learn from them. What are they? Why are they seeing these things? Why is God at work in these ways? And let's see how he's at work in our country and join him in what he's doing, and make sure we don't have a lot of barriers, Brett, to multiplication. I think in America, we create barriers that keep us from multiplying. And I think our Indian and Chinese and African brothers and sisters could help us remove some of those.
Exactly. So I want to just kind of hit home a lot of, the thing that really hits home to me is the early church talking about just the ordinary man and woman, right? And it's exactly, so, to multiply, these aren't big churches, right? Especially when you think about the American church, we got the building or meeting in the skating rink, or, you got a pastor up there and you're raising money, things like that. But these other countries, number one, they don't probably have a lot of money, right? They don't have buildings, and they're just ordinary men and women just having a church. What's the size of a normal church, right? That someone's leading?
So it really depends on the context, Brett, and how heavy the persecution is. The heavier the persecution, the smaller it is. But I believe on average right now, a church like what I'm talking about around the world is around 20. Sometimes it can be more like 12 if it's heavy persecution. And again, that's the average. Victor, my friend that I told you about in India, the average church in their movement of 10 plus million baptized believers is around 50. But Brett, they're not small because they couldn't be big. They could be huge. They're small because they want to multiply. Yeah. You know what I mean? Brett, think about this. This blows pastors' minds when I share this. And there's studies on this. The average cost per baptism in the American church is $1.5 million.
Wow.
If you take all the money all of our churches spend on buildings and staff salaries and programs and all that and divide it by our number of baptisms, Brett, 1.5 million. Guess what the cost per baptism is in the movement I was telling you about in India? 66 cents. So Brett, how many people are we going to reach when our cost per baptism is 1.5 million? I mean, it's kind of should make us sick. It should make American pastors sick, like myself, because I've contributed to this. And that, I don't think that's what Jesus meant in Matthew 28. Hey, go make disciples. It's going to cost you $1 million each.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make sense.
No.
You know what I mean? And so I would say, Brett, in our network of churches now, we encourage them to not outgrow the size of a house or something. So we don't say you need to be 10 or 20. But the church I was a part of in Lubbock, one of our churches was like 36, including children. Just, Brett, small enough so that you can do the functions of the church in Acts 2, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Corinthians 14. These passages, they encourage a smaller atmosphere because different people are using their spiritual gifts and so on. They're able to eat together, that kind of thing. Brett, that was harder for us to do with 1,000 people in the room. When there's 1,000 people in the room, I use my gift.
Yeah.
The worship guy uses his gift, or lady uses her gift, but everybody else just kind of sits and watches us.
Yeah.
It's just not exactly what 1 Corinthians 14 was modeling for us.
Yeah, exactly. I want to talk about two things. So in your book, you talk a lot about other countries really focusing on being obedient, right, to the Word of God. And in American church, a lot of times it's just about knowledge. We go to hear you, Chris, talk, and we're like, "Oh, that was good. That was a great sermon. Now let's go to Applebee's." I don't know, but you really talk about that they really focus on being obedient, which you talk about the Great Commission, and if we really want to obey, we go out and we create disciples, right? So talk to us about that. Like, what are some of the things on that they're focused on being obedient? Like, how is it a little bit different than what we're doing here?
Yeah. So, Brett, this is a key for sure. It's the difference between knowledge-based discipleship and obedience-based discipleship. Knowledge-based discipleship says you're growing spiritually if you're learning more. Obedience-based discipleship says you're growing in maturity, or you're growing spiritually if you're obeying, or if you're doing what Jesus said. And James tells us in chapter 1, Brett, as you know, don't just be hearers of the word and so deceive yourselves.
Yeah.
Be doers. I think one of the ways we deceive ourselves, Brett, in being hearers of the word is because we heard it, we think we've grown. Oh, hey, I heard a great sermon. I just learned something. That doesn't necessarily mean you're more fruitful or anything. The Pharisees knew a lot.
Yeah.
You can, if you're just hearing the word, Brett, you can deceive yourself. I think there's a lot of Christians in America that are deceived into thinking, oh, I'm somewhere spiritually, when there's really not a lot of evidence that they're hearing from Jesus and obeying him daily. They just know a lot because they've been in church all of their life. James says we're to be doers of the word. You see Jesus talking about this, Paul talking about this all throughout the New Testament. In Matthew 28, Brett, which you referred to, Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and teach. And most people think the next part says, and teach them all the things Jesus has commanded us. It doesn't say that. It says, teach them to obey or observe all the things Jesus has commanded us. That's important. So, it doesn't just say teach them stuff. It says teach them to obey, train them toward obedience, or in another way you could say this, Brett, is toward following Jesus. Obeying him is to follow him, not just listening to him, And then he says he'll be with us always, even to the end of the age. I asked an underground Chinese leader, Brett, once, what's the difference between the Christians that you know in your country and the Christians that you've gotten to know in our country? Because he was speaking to different, in different places, different churches. And so he knew some American Christians. And he said something along the lines of, in our country, when we hear the word of God, we try to obey it. In your country, you're just content listening to it. It's like, oh my gosh. I'm a pastor. I'm not disagreeing with him.
Yeah.
I think I do that. But he was just kind of saying, Brett, basically, y'all don't take it very seriously. Because to take it seriously, Brett, is to do something with it. To not take it very seriously is to hear it and think, I'm in, I'm done. I've done what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's not what Jesus said.
Yeah.
Jesus said the way you build the foundation of your life on solid rock is you hear his words and you put them into practice. You hear and obey, not just you hear. A lot of people even think this story about, building on sand or solid rock has to do with whether you've heard Jesus. No, it's not about, you're on solid rock. If you heard him, it's you heard him and you've obeyed him, or you put it into practice. And so, Brett, there is a distinction, I think, between how they think you grow spiritually in these movements overseas and how we think you grow spiritually. And the distinction I've heard is often described as they think the key is obedience-based discipleship. When Jesus speaks, you should do what he says. You should follow him. You should obey him. And here, their sense is, and my own sense being a pastor is, we think we're good if we just hear.
Yeah, yeah. I want to just to kind of ask some questions around that. So number one, I was listening to your book, and you talked about a lot of the people there start reading scripture, and it's not about what did you learn. They ask the question, did you obey what it said? And let's just take fasting for example. Jesus says it's not if you fast, it's when you fast. So, and that's like. Right. That's just probably a discipline that we don't really do much in America, right? It's just like, oh, I don't have to do everything because that's legalistic, right? So what do you say about that? I guess, because a lot of people might be listening and be like, well, yes, but I don't want to be legalistic, which is, a term that we throw around a lot when it comes to, I guess, following rules, what people would say.
Brett, people do bring that up, and on my bolder days, when I'm feeling like being very honest, I'll say usually, Brett, in our context, when we're throwing around legalism, we're throwing it around as a justification for our lukewarmness. It's just true.
Wow.
Because most of the people, Brett, encouraging us to obey these things are not saying, and because you're going to obey them, you're going to be saved, right? That you can merit a right standing before God or righteousness before God. That's not at all what they're saying, which would be like a form of legalism, right? People that are encouraging you, pastors maybe of an evangelical church, Brett, that you go to, or that, somebody goes to, is encouraging you to fast or to make disciples or whatever. It's not legalism just because you don't want to do it. It may be an obedience issue on your part. It would be legalism if your pastor got up and said, hey, God's not going to love you unless you did this, so, you might as well just assume you're not going to heaven unless you do X, Y, or Z. Brett, that's not what I'm hearing much in evangelical churches. We know that we are saved by grace alone, in Christ alone, through faith alone, and then we're encouraged to follow and obey Christ. That's not legalism. That's called doing what we're supposed to be doing. That's called the Great Commission. That's called Matthew 7. That's called Philippians 4. That's called James 1. Brett, here's the truth. I don't, in my own experience, I don't entertain that word for very long because I know it means lukewarmness. People in America, to justify their own lack of obedience or their own lukewarmness, will say legalism because, Brett, it makes them feel better about not doing it.
Amen.
It's just the truth, brother. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to all your listeners that now are like, I'm not buying his book.
No, it's good. But let me go back to your dad, right? So, and this is one thing that I've really, really experienced. Do you think that when you really pursue God and you start to experience the intimacy with God, you want to do those things? I mean, someone with a lukewarm might say, I don't want to pray for 3 hours. And your dad's sitting on the floor desiring because he's experiencing God.
That's it.
It changes.
That's totally it, Brett. Yeah. Absolutely. When you choose, I'm not going to be lukewarm like it talks about in the book of Revelation, but I want to be hot and on fire. You want to do these things that honor and please God. Nobody told my dad, you need to go lay on the floor for 3 hours every morning or God doesn't like you or you're not doing what you're supposed to be. Nobody told him that, Brett. He just started reading the scriptures and he fell in love with Jesus all over again. He thought, where else would I rather be? Yeah. In fact, he told me this, Brett, one time. He said, son, sometimes getting to my prayer closet is the hardest thing in the world because there's so many distractions. He said, but I can say this for sure, son. Once I'm in my, quote, prayer closet, there's no place else I'd rather be. Brett,
man.
Yes, this is a desire thing. God, as you ask him to fill you with his spirit and you say, God, I'm not on fire, set me on fire again. These are things you want to do. You want to please your heavenly Father. Absolutely. Yes. And just like Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 5. And so, yes, this is what he was doing, making disciples, praying. It's the overflow of just having fallen in love with Jesus, which is why, Brett, I think he told one of the churches in Revelation, hey, you've fallen away from your first love. Remember how it was at the beginning and do the things you did at first. As your love for Jesus even grows lukewarm, you've got to be in a prayer closet praying, saying, I want that love, God, for you to increase again, because I know it propels me to obey you. Yeah. I heard a guy say one time that God's love language, speaking of love languages, Brett, According to John 14, John 16, God's love language is our loving obedience. God's love language is our loving obedience. Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me, right? John 14. So our obedience to God is how we express our love. That's how God wants to receive love from us. Again, Brett, not in a legalistic way of trying to earn anything before him. Again, remember, that's just an excuse. Yeah. We want to obey him because we love him. He saved us and he's changed our life.
Wow. Awesome, Chris. Well, hey, man, just so many good things. Guys, check out for Megachurch Multiplication, Chris's book, and just definitely, check that out, read that. Chris, I want to just kind of end this show with something, because obviously I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and creators. When I talk, one of the reasons why I had you on the show is because I feel like you are an entrepreneur, you are a creator, you're building something just like a lot of business people do. And one thing that has really kind of hit me in the last, probably, listening to your book, and I go to my church. So I go to a church with, a few thousand people, members, and ever since COVID, I remember it was probably a few months ago, there's a family section in the church, right? And because they don't have the kids service, and my son, he has ADHD, so we don't like to take him into the main service because he might throw something at the pastor. I don't really know. But so we take him to the family section, and I was looking around, and it was only us. And it was just a huge room, and I see there's lights up there, and there's a lot of chairs, and it was really just us. Like, we're alone completely in this room. And I start to look around, and I'm like, man, we're the only ones in here, but gosh, just to run this thing costs millions of dollars, right? And we're like the only ones in this section. And it really just got me thinking about money and getting paid. And I always wonder, what's the history of the church on, when did we start to pay pastors and people to run these churches? And now we're in this where it is a paid pastor, it's a paid position, it's staff, it's a building, and all these different things. And something hit you 4 or 5 years ago where that obviously kind of affected you too, because you were getting paid, but you started a business on the side because maybe you didn't like that sort of thing, right? Maybe you didn't believe, I don't know if I should be taking money from the church to pay me, right? So you started this business on the side, and you've actually been trying to teach and help other pastors do the same thing.
Right.
So talk to us about that. Talk to us about the money thing, getting paid staff, and what's your feedback on that?
So, Brett, we can hit stop here, start a new podcast. This will be this is it. Welcome to the second hour, everybody. No, so Brett, in our situation specifically, especially as we made this transition, what you hear a lot from ordinary people, especially in American churches, well, you can make disciples because you get paid by a church. You can plant churches because you're supported as a missionary. No, I can't. I'm in business. I'm a businessman or woman. I can't do that. Brett, we thought it would be strategic in modeling for our church. Like it says, 1 Peter 5, shepherds are supposed to lead by your own good example. Brett, to come off the payroll and model for ordinary men and women that you can be a business. And this is the only way we're going to see multiplication, is if ordinary business men and women become convinced they can make disciples. So Brett, we come off the payroll to try to model as elders for our church. We're working now. We own businesses now, and we're still making disciples and planting churches. So now, Brett, when other ordinary folks are watching that, they can't say, well, you're paid. Okay, you're not paid. Okay, you're paid like me. Okay, all right. So maybe you can do this as an ordinary person. Paul, Brett, as you know, was building tents in some of his ministry on the side. Paul was building tents. So Paul could not have been planting churches like what I planted, because he would have had no time to build tents. So He must have been planting more simple churches that ordinary people could lead. You know what I mean? Not so complicated and expensive and complex and all of that. So all I have to say is, in our specific situation, we thought it would be wise to come off and model. And so I wrote a chapter in the book called Tent Making, explaining more about why we did that, Brett. And again, I just think the key to multiplication in North America is the ordinary man and woman, like you said, is going to have to own this too. It's not just the person on stage. It's not just I'm giving money so he can do it. It's one man or woman now, right? Yeah. Or a staff. We've got to have everybody, like John and Peter, ordinary, unschooled. You don't have to have gone to seminary. making disciples. And when you make disciples, sometimes churches break out when they come to know and follow Jesus. So when you make disciples and you indirectly plant churches, Brett, it's for everybody. The guys in India, Brett, they're effective. They work 15 hours a day in a rice field, and they're effective, powerful church planners and disciple makers. Amen. So I don't know where we came up with all this. If our job is to sit there and give, and then if we like it, sit there again next week. And then if we don't, go find another church to sit in. I don't know how that became American Christianity. But overseas, they're working all day, and then they wake up early for an early morning prayer meeting. Wow. And then when they have time off, their hobby is making disciples and helping other villages know and follow Jesus. This should be the ordinary Christian life. That's not what it looks like in America right now, unfortunately. Maybe hopefully soon. But the book of Acts, the New Testament, that shouldn't seem, Brett, radical. That was normal. That was ordinary. And yet when Americans at least read it, it feels pretty radical.
Yeah, exactly. We'll kind of end the show with this because I definitely agree with you, Chris. And I was talking to one of my pastors back in the day, and he just graduated from seminary school and came in, and he had a mentor pastor, and he walked into the mentor pastor's office, just graduated, and he expected all these cheers like, hey, congratulations, you're a pastor now. You're going to go do amazing things for God. And the mentor pastor asked him, are you sure that you really want to do this? And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is amazing. This is where I'm led. And he's like, well, because his mentor pastor came from the marketplace, and he said, I think that I was more effective when I was in the marketplace than I am as a pastor. So just kind of take it with that, but I definitely agree with y'all this, Chris. So if you guys are tuning in, check out From Megachurch to Multiplication. Chris, it's been awesome, man. I appreciate you being on the show today. Right. And one last thing, just to kind of speak, most of the listeners out there are living in America, but just last words of wisdom as people are just digesting this kind of new concept, because it takes time to really kind of process this and digest all of what this has.
Brett, what I would encourage anybody to do, Christian, or even if you're not a Christian, I would encourage them to pick up the scriptures and start reading. And don't read the scriptures just to learn things about God. Read the scriptures to experience him. Read the scriptures to learn how to follow him. Read the scriptures to learn what he wants you to do in a certain situation. And let the scriptures, because they will draw you to your knees regularly in prayer. And if you're devoted to the scriptures and you're devoted to prayer, I guarantee you will start experiencing God unlike you ever have before. And I just want you to know his plans for your life are amazing. So, Brett, I always tell people, his plans for your life are better than your plans for your life. And I know your plans for your life are good. You have good plans for your life. His plans for your life are better. The early church, where they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Be devoted to God, to his word, to prayer. And I just would tell them, Brett, that I think they'll see God do some things in their life they could have, never dreamed.
Awesome. Love it. And this is a wrap with Chris Galanos. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Chris. God bless you. Just wish you so many blessings on your family and your church planting movements. So appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.